Alright, this will focus on Chapter 7, which is about public opinion. The central question is, what is public opinion and what factors help to shape it? So, initially, the founders were very distrustful of public opinion. James Madison thought that filters were needed on public opinion, such as the indirectly elected Senate, as defense to the people against their own temporary errors and delusions and the tyranny of their own passions. There were other checks, federalist system, independent judiciary, staggered terms, electoral college, bicameralism, Supreme Court, whatnot. But over time, public opinion does somewhat drive public policy, except with the exceptions of the balanced budget, gun control, and term limits. So public opinion is those expressed attitudes held by a significant number of people on matters of government and politics, not opinions of private matters, not unexpressed opinions, or not just that of a small group. Oh crap, my bad. So how do we measure public opinion? So it's usually done by polls. There are several kinds. The straw polls are just try to determine which way the wind is blowing. The sample size may be large, but is seldom representative. You also have crap polls, like ones you see on Drudge Report, which somebody could vote over and over, and obviously there's a selective readership that will actually do those polls. In the case of Drudge Report, it's mostly conservative readers. Scientific polls are the best kinds of polls, but are very expensive and difficult to do. Much of the expertise was first developed by Procter & Gamble and other consumer products companies. Basically BCK signed off on dozens of market research studies, polls to optimize shampoo fragrance, foam creaminess, rinsing speed, etc. Gallup and Pew are the big political pollsters of today. You also have tracking polls and exit polls and a lot of focus groups. So characteristics of a good poll: they define the appropriate universe, example, likely voters. They also construct a representative sample that is randomized, statistically balanced, and stratified. They also prepare valid questions, ones that are not leading or loaded. So, for example, wording does. For example, you might want to be careful how you word a welfare question. Welfare. When people ask, "Do you support welfare?" you get a much more negative response than asking, "Do you support aid to the poor?" when they're really the same thing. So, select and control how the poll will be taken must be selected and controlled for, in person versus via phone or online. The interviewers must be well trained and there must be quality control. Proper analyses of results must be done. Tests for significance, confidence levels, sampling errors. Now, of course, it's not really easy to do a good poll. For example, biggest example of a major poll flop is New Coke. Basically, what happened was, in blind taste tests, people preferred Pepsi over Coke. So, what the Coca-Cola company is that they tweaked the recipe of Coke to New Coke. And according to polling results, blind taste tests showed that the New Coke tasted better than Pepsi. Unfortunately, the backlash to New Coke was so enormous because, you had people who when they called Coca-Cola to complain, they sounded as if they had lost a loved one, because to them, the old Coke, despite not tasting as good as Pepsi in blind taste tests, according to polling data, they still remember the old Coke taste as integral for their memories throughout life. So, polls will always be held back by issues of intensity, stability, and relevance. It's very hard to measure these characteristics. Polls are so ubiquitous that they are now changing public opinion, and the media reporting on them does change opinion. This is all part of the Heisenberg theory. This is all part of the Heisenberg Theory, which dictates that the reports on the horse race or political race impact the actual outcome of the political race. For example, if if you support candidate B, if they say there are two candidates A and B, and you support candidate B, but then you see polling data that shows that candidate A is going to win an overwhelming landslide, then you'll probably support candidate A, which might help him actually win an overwhelming landslide. Now the question is, are polls good enough now that they can actually replace voting? That is arguably what is happening in China today. In order to stay in power, the Chinese Communist Party will conduct regular polls on their citizens in order to make sure they're dissatisfied and thus see what shortcomings they need to make up for, and thus avoid getting overthrown. So basically, the question is, where do people's public opinions come from? In other words, what drives political socialization? Family and parents enjoy a near monopoly on socialization of young, impressionable children. This is even true for rebels, or people who diverge from their parents significantly in their opinions. They are still influenced by the opinions of their parents, because those kids' opinions will almost always be the opposite of those parents. Religion of parents also is very important. Also, schools pick up with a thorough indoctrination process, like, the Pledge of Allegiance, patriotic songs, saluting the flag, and, AP government. So, other factors that influence people's public opinions are occupation and race, gender, place of residence, etc., mass media, peer groups, opinion leaders, authors, connected people, news people, politicians, quote-unquote experts, academics, talking heads, actors, you name it. So historic events have changed public opinion dramatically. So Great Depression, it increased support of an active government in the economy. The 60s had a breakthrough in civil rights, thus you had a major increase in the support of civil rights. But you also had great distrust of the man or the government or authorities, with Vietnam, Watergate, and just all sorts of awful political assassinations. 9/11, increased acceptance of greater regression of privacy rights. The Las Vegas shooting, on one hand, energized the NRA to mobilize its resources to once again stall gun control legislation. At the same time, you also have a major push for gun control legislation in the first place. So, yeah. In terms of our historical era, probably you could argue it's the carbon comeuppance, or the climate change generation, considering the fact that if anyone reads UN or US government reports about what climate change will do, it's really ugly. This is the whole the idea of the carbon comeuppance, the new prosperity, maybe or maybe the Great Recession generation, because we grew up in grew up during the days of the Great Recession. Yeah. So, this is just an example of opinion gaps between young adults and senior citizens. Interestingly, one of the most interesting ones is the fact that the young are very supportive of the idea of support investing Social Security in the stock market to make it fiscally solvent. So the gender gap in public opinion, generally speaking, women are advocate for a less hawkish foreign policy, a more generous domestic policy, and are somewhat more in favor of legalizing abortion. So basically, this is some advice from my history teacher when it comes to getting your information. Just diversify your information feed. Try to look at sources that cover a broad ideological spectrum, like BBC and Al Jazeera. Give some politicians some room and grace. Maybe consider going to politics. Open minds versus changing minds. Listen, think, respond. Don't diminish, threaten, trigger. Also assess the fairness and the validity of the source. This is just an example of the age gap of political opinions. Generally speaking, the young favor the Democrats, the older favor the Republicans. Women generally favor Democrats, and males generally favor Republicans. And race, well, you can kind of You probably already know this one. Whites lean Republican, whereas minorities overwhelmingly vote Democrat. African Americans being especially true. Funny enough, Asian Americans used to be pretty Republican. Same with Latinos, but then Trump has pushed them to the left. Um, oh, sorry about that. Looks like another video was being done processed. General like generally now white college graduates are pretty split, but they lean Trump. Whites with no college degree overwhelmingly support Trump. Non-whites, regardless of their education level, overwhelmingly support Clinton, overwhelmingly support the Democrats. Income is kind of interesting. You would expect, generally, less well, you would really, to some extent, this isn't entirely surprising that, generally the, significantly less well off would support, the Democrats, and that some of the more, middle class, the upper middle class would vote Republican, but barely, though. This is a very small margin. However, interestingly, the margin narrows significantly for very wealthy people. Generally speaking, the elites are much more polarized than the ones beneath than non-elites. Like I said, great, it just said that elites are more partisan and ideologically polarized than the average citizen. An ideology, if you didn't know, is a pattern of beliefs. But the average citizens are moving from somewhat sort of to more and more partisan. Most Americans know very little about most specific issues, but they use heuristics or rules of thumb and shortcuts to guide them, and generally are pretty good at doing this. But sometimes it is not. Basically, if you want this is a traditional view of political spectrum. Far left is communist, far right is fascist. In the middle is moderate / centrist. Towards the left is Democrat. Towards the right is Republican. More liberal means more left. More conservative means more right. This is another example. This is a more detailed one if you want to know, and this is another one if you want as well. So this is just like a sorting of various political leaders throughout history. Wait, what? This does not seem. What? Okay, I dispute the idea of putting these two in the authoritarian right. I really dispute that. Yeah, some people are. Oh boy, really. Okay, okay, this seems a little bit absurd. Why the heck is Hitler towards here? He should be all the way over here. So this is not exactly the most accurate. These are just another way of sorting ideologies, So if you want to, what do these terms mean? Generally, the left / Democrats / liberals, they focus on socioeconomic equality. They advocate for more government involvement and redistribution of wealth. The idea of share the wealth, we is good. They advocate for multilateralism in foreign affairs, basically working with the United Nations and working with a variety of allies and negotiating with our enemies. Examples of liberal media sources are TV networks, MSNBC, New York Times. They advocate for the right to choose for gay marriage. A shorthand way and somewhat derisive way of referring to these guys, including me, is green, gay, and godless. That's a little bit offensive. For the right or the Republicans and conservatives, they focus more on economic freedom, less government involvement. They tend to be more free marketish, emphasizing private property rights and profit motive. They believe that greed is good. They are more unilateral in foreign affairs. They advocate less for. They are quite. They don't necessarily like the United Nations or negotiating with a variety of people. They tend to do it gung ho style. By ourselves. Examples of conservative media outlets are Fox News, Talk Radio, Wall Street Journal, Right to Life. They also believe in the idea of right to life. Shorthand way of referring to these guys is guns, golf, and white guys. So that is it. It was a very short video.